Shalom. This is Ron Warren with the Nuggets of the Torah, and this is the fifth portion of the Torah, Hayei. On January the 20th of 1961, when President Kennedy gave his inaugural address, he said these words: "Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation." In this parsha, the torch is being passed to a new generation. It is the changing of the guard. The covenant torch is being passed from Abraham to a new generation of his son Isaac. Abraham's focus and desire for God's promises with the covenant is to continue through his son Isaac. Abraham had other sons, but the reason why the Torah records Isaac's wife hunting is because Isaac is the promised heir to the covenant promises that was given to Abraham, and with a wife, Isaac would have the provision to pass the promises to the next generation. It's the same torch that is being passed today between the older leader and the new generation of Messianic believers. It is the focus of the older generation to train them for that purpose. But before we continue, it must be understood that the Torah does not always follow chronological order. And here's one of the examples. This parsha starts with the death of Sarah and ends with the recording of the death of Abraham. In Genesis chapter 23, verses 1 and 2, it reads, "Sarah lived to be 127 years old, and she died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her." And in Genesis chapter 25, verses 7 and 8, it reads, "Altogether, Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died a good old age, an old man, full of years, and he was gathered to his people." It records the death of Abraham in Genesis chapter 25, verse 7 and 8, and records the births of Jacob and Esau in Genesis chapter 25, verses 25 and 26. But here's the problem. Abraham was not dead when the twins were born. The twins, Jacob and Esau, were 15 years old when Abraham died at 175. Count the years. When Isaac was born, Abraham was 100 years old. And when Isaac got married, Abraham was 140 years old. When Jacob and Esau were born 20 years later, making Abraham 160 years old. The difference between 175, the age he died, and 160 leaves a balance of 15 years, which would have been the ages of Jacob and Esau. You know, every person has baggage that they bring into a marriage, and Isaac and Rebekah also had it. What kind of a person was Isaac? Isaac is the son of his parents' very old age. His mother has suffered years of barrenness before Isaac was born, and the birth was a result of obvious divine orchestration. Isaac was raised in an environment of open and caring communication between his parents, and he may have observed that his mother was the one who took the initiative when any kind of family problems arose. Isaac suffered the trauma of his father's attempted sacrifice of him, and which is a fact that's very hard to put into words, and he could not have remained unaffected that his older half-brother, Ishmael, was banished from the family as a protection for him and his right to inherit. Now, from the command that to offer his only son as a sacrifice, Isaac was as good as dead to his father. 3 days later, Abraham receives Isaac back from the death. At this point, Isaac disappears from the story. And after the offering of Genesis chapter 22, he is not mentioned until the time when Isaac and Rebekah meet face to face and are married. What kind of a person was Rebekah? Rebekah can be described as kind, considerate, hard-working, beautiful, and a virgin. And if you add the midrashic descriptions of her, and you can also add intelligent, worldly, and sometimes scheming to this list. But here's the problem. Deviousness runs in her family. Her brother Laman will deceive Jacob by switching brides on him on his wedding night and then prolonging Jacob's service to him. Now the journey back to Beersheba is about 450 miles. Rebekah placed herself in the hands of strangers with the prospect of accepting a husband she's never seen and whose character she knew nothing. Yet she was willing to obey what she believed was the will of God. And her faith is remarkable as she submits to the authority of her father and her brother, and ultimately to God. Between Isaac and Rebekah, Rebekah is the stronger one. And that baggage in a marriage will become stronger even in the next week's Parsha. Here's another thing. Rebekah is the perfect biblical type of the body of the Messiah. Before anyone can enter into the body of the Messiah, they must first answer the question given to Rebekah in Genesis chapter 24, verse 58. It reads, "And so they called Rebekah and asked her, 'Will you go with this man?' 'I will go,' she said. Will your answer to the question also be, 'I will go'?" Shalom. Until next week's with the Nuggets of the Torah.